Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night, which is your chance to ask me whatever curly question you've got and see whether or not I can help you on your property development journey. Now, in order to do that, what I ask you to do is click on the links below, and if you can do that, that allows me to do whatever prep work I need to do in order to get the answer that you need. And we run these open mic nights typically on the first Sunday of every single month. So submit your questions in advance for next month, and we'd love to help you on your journey. In the meantime, we've got a cracking number of questions for you today, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on a recent trip that I did to China. Now, I'm only going to give you a small update here, and I will update the wider community through a whole series of Facebook posts and the like to give you some insights into some of the things that we actually did, including going to the Canton Fair, looking at a range of different suppliers and materials and that sort of thing, and also looked at a whole bunch of prefabrication with regards to how do we actually bring in pre-constructed townhouses, pre-constructed mid to high-rise buildings, and some fantastic things that we saw, including a number of visits to some factories with some massive sizes with regards to them. And I see a huge amount of potential in doing that, and I intend to give you some updates on that over the next coming weeks because there is just so much that's in my head from that particular visit that I need to drip feed that over a period of time so I don't inundate you all with one thing. That said, tonight being open mic night is your questions, so I've got a whole bunch of them I'm going to get into. The very first one comes from Rob. Rob says, hey, the City of Ipswich has just announced a new planning scheme expected to commence on the 1st of July 2025. This scheme received ministerial approval on 14th of February and is now with council to make final changes to comply with the conditions of the ministerial approval. In your experiences, are they likely to fully implement the new scheme on the 1st of July, or is it common for councils to prolong rollouts of planning scheme updates? Rob, fantastic question, but what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to broaden this question out and talk about the wider process that happens for every single council in every single state. Then I'm going to drill back into the City of Ipswich specifically so that everybody understands. Now, every 10 years or so, the planning schemes in every single council get updated. Okay, there's a series of processes that they go through to actually review that. It's the opportunity for them to reassess what their population growth is going to be, where they're actually going to put the extra density, rezoning opportunities, and the like. And so every 10 years or so, you'll tend to see the same process happen in every single council. Now, it's not exactly 10 years, but there or thereabouts that the process actually occurs. Now, what tends to happen is a 4-stage process. Stage number 1, council comes up with what they believe to be the right outcome for the community. But what they do before they actually put it in stone, they draw it up as a draft, and they go out to what is called community consultation. So what the community does is they go and lobby the community and say, hey, these are the changes that we're actually going to do. Give us your input and feedback as to if this is exactly what you want to see, if there are any tweaks and changes and that sort of thing. That process then goes back internally into council. They then refine their initial draft review. Then they submit that through to the relevant state government bodies. The state government bodies then will, have their feedback and review. They'll see whether or not council have listened to the community and amended accordingly. And then the state government will then, give updated feedback through to council. Now, at this point in time, we're about halfway. Okay, so it's gone stage 1, council, stage 2, state government. Council then has a chance to further refine the design or further refine the plan. And again, they go out to community consultation at this point in time. However, we're pretty close to the final product at this point in time. Then they then go back to the state government a second time. State government give their final review, and then it tends to be implemented at that point. That process, the back and forth being 4 stages. So council, then state government, then council, then state government, with some, feedback from the community that happens in between, can take anywhere up to 2 years. And it's always on public display through that entire process. So everybody can see the draft. Everybody can see I guess, what is happening, where the stages are at, etc. By the time we get to where we are here, in this instance with Ipswich City Council, it has gone through the final stages of everything. And really what council are trying to do is they're trying to write their internal policies and process and procedures as to how they're actually going to start to measure and amend this. So it is extraordinarily unlikely that the plan would actually change at this point in time, because it's already gone through a number of instances of reviews and feedback mechanisms and the like, and it is almost certainly going to come out on the prescribed date that they have proposed, being the 1st of July. If it's not going to, then you will see under the public notification period that they will amend the dates there in a public forum. And it's only because they haven't got themselves ready for, I guess, their internal processes to actually be ready to measure against that. Don't forget that they've got to educate the community. They've got to educate the town planners who are going to be writing code. They've got to change internal measurements and a whole bunch of other things. So those internal policies and procedures do take some time to actually write and implement and educate the appropriate sources. But large and hold, the dates that they propose are realistic and most probable to actually go ahead. So it is unlikely at this point in time that date of the 1st of July that you mentioned, Rob, will actually change. So now I personally have not seen the changes to Ipswich City Council. Looking forward to hearing what they might be. And as part of our process, we'll reach out to Ipswich City Council to see whether or not there's any opportunities and or challenges that they might want to educate our community on, being that Ipswich is an area of growth for southeast Queensland, and I anticipate a whole bunch of density going out that particular direction. So good to see that they're close to implementing that. Next question comes from Sophie. Now, Sophie says, "Hi, Rob. Have you done or seen any successful subdivisions done in future urban or emerging communities? Where can I find more information about this, like minimum lot size, etc.?" Sophie, this is really interesting, but firstly, you haven't actually said what particular council, so I'm just going to talk about this one a little bit more generically. So when we talk about future urban or emerging community, that can have slightly different meanings in different councils, but largely what we're talking about is an area that council recognise is going to have some future growth, but the services have not necessarily been deployed there. So the sewer, the stormwater, electricity supplies, the road network, and a whole bunch of other things like that. And so what council is looking for is for the developer to be proposing what they would like to see in that particular area, where they see there as actually opportunity. So that could be townhouses, it could be subdivisions, it could be shopping centres, it could be all sorts of things. But those emerging community facilities, generally, you want to be starting to think about not just your site in isolation, but how does your site fit in with the context of the surrounding area and the needs of the surrounding area as it starts to develop. Now, if you're just doing a single site, that can be quite difficult to actually try to do, but some of the larger developers will actually consume many, many sites, and they'll do what they call a master plan in doing that. So they're actually designing a mini city or a mini suburb in actually starting to do that. So the intention is for the emerging community side of things that you are the one going to be developing the future out there, and council themselves haven't yet got a firm view on what that actually looks like. So can it be subdivisions? The answer is yes. Could it be childcare centres? The answer is yes. Could it be shops? The answer is yes. But what you have to do is you have to put through the merits of your particular design and why you think that that is something that council needs to consider for the community that has not yet been fully established in the area. So it is an opportunity for almost anything, noting that you're going to be the one that's likely having to pull the services through. And in pulling the services through, don't forget that you're probably going to have to allow for the capacity of upstream connections to plug into that. So if you are the first lot in what might be 50 or 100 lots, you might have to do a giant sewer line because the extra 100 lots that are still to be developed will have extra capacity that might need to pass through your particular property. So you need to understand the implications of that when going out there. So it's not for the faint of heart, but that doesn't mean that the opportunity isn't there. So I wish you luck in that. And if you want further information on that, I'm more than happy for you to submit another question and just give me clarification with regards to which particular council that might actually be. Emerging community from a naming convention, though, is typically something that I see more in Southeast Queensland, that particular naming convention. So I'm anticipating that that's where you are. Richard then has a question. You recently posted a Property Pulse article, and because he's mentioned Property Pulse, I might actually use that as an opportunity to promote Property Pulse. Property Pulse is a series of blog articles that we write where we release a new article every single week. That goes out via email, but it also goes to this link that you've got actually down here. And we write on all sorts of topics, but he's asking about one in particular, which is an article titled, Should You Pay Yourself a Property Management Fee? So if you actually go to that Property Pulse link, you can actually look up the article that he's actually referencing. In this article, you said, as a general rule of thumb, I'd much rather you see you keep your job initially, build your nest egg into a bucket entity of some kind, and then pay yourself a wage from the bucket entity when there's not enough saved up. When there's enough saved up for you to leave your job. There's also the advantage of showing steady wage from the source over an extended period. Great for serviceability. As I'm now in a position to do this, could you please clarify what you mean by a bucket entity so I understand what I need to set up? If possible, recommend a company that should set this up for me. Many thanks in advance. Richard, firstly, I cannot give advice that is something that I'm literally not allowed to do, especially in a public forum like this. So what I'm going to give you here is conceptual in nature only, and somewhere I have a little tag that says information only. But I can't find it at the moment. So a bucket entity could be a number of different kinds of entities. It could be a company. It could be a trust with a corporate trustee. It could be a combination of a company owned by a trust. It could be a trust that is owned by a company. But the entity, whichever one you choose, and there are many benefits for one versus the other, that entity collects all the cash from the projects up above. So if you imagine a project up here, I guess, distributes its profits down to the bucket entity, and the bucket, by its very name, collects the cash as it comes down. Now, the bucket entity doesn't do any trading. It doesn't do any, consulting. It doesn't do anything at all that puts anything at risk. The whole concept here is it just is a collector of cash. Okay, this is an asset protection mechanism that helps you de-risk the cash that you've actually collected, so that when you go into your next project, that the profits from previous projects are now protected. Okay, by not trading inside that entity and just simply using that as a collector of cash, you are now able to, drip feed yourself a wage, as we're actually talking about here, and show regular and consistent income from one entity, okay? Whereas if you pay yourself a project management fee from the development all the way up here, at some point that development is going to end. And when that development ends, your wage stops. And then when you go and do a new development, which may or may not be a crossover, so you might have a period of time where you have no income coming through to you. It's kind of looking like, from the bank's perspective, you've like a job day one, then that job is quit, and then you start another job, and then that job is quit. And so it shows very irregular and inconsistent income. Whereas if you actually do it from the bucket entity down the bottom, the proceeds of the profits of the previous project have collected into that entity, and you can drip feed yourself that wage ongoing, and it's a consistent, regular income stream they're actually going to go. Now, there's pros and cons for each of those, and I'm not saying that is the only way of doing this. There might be times where you actually want to demonstrate that project management fee from the development entity itself. So this is not a one size fits all. You need to make sure that you're actually talking to your accountant and also your solicitor as to the best way to actually set this up. But conceptually, what we're trying to show you is that by collecting that cash down the bottom, in an entity which is fit for purpose for your tax purposes and for your asset protection purposes, then you can then pay yourself a regular and consistent wage that is outside of the individual projects. That can help you massively with regards to your serviceability because it's going to show consistency of employment and the like. And so especially if you can show that it is receiving regular payments from projects up above, then when you're able to demonstrate that, take that to the bank, and even though they're going to deem you to be self-employed, they can see that you're doing so in a reliable and consistent format. Whereas if you go there and try to pull yourself a project management wage from the one project, from a serviceability perspective, if you need that serviceability for a loan, then it might look like you're job hopping. So you want to be extraordinarily careful in understanding how you're funding your next project and whether or not that serviceability element is actually important, or are you just needing the cash in order to put food on the table and send the kids to school and all those sorts of things. Anyway, mate, hope that helps. Anyone looking for Property Pulse, that is the place to go. We've got hundreds of articles on there. We release an article a week on there on all sorts of topics, from how to source, how to find, how to fund, the due diligence processes, the building and construction processes. There's about 16 or so, maybe even 20 different topics that we actually do regular posts on. So it's a great source to actually, do little bite-size educational learning processes for you. Okay, hope that helps. Next one comes from Reeve, and Reeve says, how do I start to become a property developer? How much money do I need to start something small like a duplex? So the first thing I'm going to say, Reeve, is if you're not 100% sure on whether or not property development is for you, we have a free course called the 7-Step Formula to Financial Freedom. I'm going to highly recommend that you actually do that course. It costs nothing, obviously, because it's free, but it's going to give you the insights in what it is actually that you actually need to be considering over and above your question here, in how much money do I need, but also how do I determine what my development strategy is? How do I determine what areas are actually going to be profitable? How do I determine how I can do deals with little to no money if that happens to be your personal situation, and a whole bunch more, okay? And should you actually get through that process and you're interested to further your education, we also have a 12-month educational mentoring program called the Property Development Formula. And that one, I think I have a link for as well somewhere. So see if I can find that one. Okay, I can't. But here it is. So this is the Property Development Formula. Just know that we actually do that. So not a sales pitch in any way, shape or form. But your question with regards to how much money do I need? Well, there's actually 3 lots of cash that you need. And there's also 3 stages that you actually need it in. So when you start to think about it, you need to start to plan ahead for all of these stages as you go. The first one, you're going to need deposit, okay? So the size of the deposit is going to be very dependent upon the area upon which you're doing your deal. The next thing you need is serviceability, so the ability to fund the difference between your deposit and the debt that is actually sitting there. The third one that you need is liquid cash to actually run the deal. Okay, so those 3 lots of cash are needed at 3 stages in the process. So stage number 1, acquisition. So when we're actually acquiring the site and its raw form, okay, you may be able to acquire the site using residential lending as an example, okay? But as the deal size starts to get bigger, okay, and as it starts to become a little bit more obvious that it's a development site, some residential lenders won't actually let you acquire the site under residential lending because they know that you're going to develop it, and they only make money by having the loans for 20 or 30 years, and they can see that that's not going to be the case for you. So then you may need to consider commercial lending practices and specifically development lenders that specialize in the development space. Now, hence coming into stage 2, the construction phase. Now, at this point, if the deal is small, 2 or 3 dwellings, you may be able to do this with residential lending, in which case your serviceability will become a critical element. but you're going to need to demonstrate to the bank your intention of keeping all of the stock. And that means that you need to be able to service the loan and also be able to service the debt at the end of that, including any rental income that you might achieve at the end of the process. If you can't do that because you can't demonstrate your serviceability, or alternatively, if the deal is greater than 3 dwellings, then you are going to need commercial lending practices to do your construction loan. Okay, now construction lenders are a lot more understanding of the development process. They understand that the deals are going to be much shorter in duration. They also understand the risk elements that are associated with it. And so they are going to not be looking so much at your serviceability, but more looking at the development itself, the merits of the development, the profitability of the development, and your skills in the ability to actually execute that particular deal, whether or not you've actually done that before, and whether or not you need to put a team around you in order to support you in actually getting that deal done. Now, then the third stage would be your intention to keep any residual stock at the end. So if you sell 1 or 2 of those down, and you want to keep the balance of that, can you service that? And now that then comes back to residential lending. So they are the 3 stages and the 3 lots of cash actually needed to go into that. Now, your question was, how much money do I need to start? Well, that is a function of what area are you starting to farm in. So you're talking about a duplex. You could do that. You could do a duplex in a very, very low socioeconomic area, in which case the acquisition cost, the quality of the construction, that sort of thing would be extraordinarily low. Or you could do that in a very high up market area, in which case the acquisition cost is extraordinarily high. The quality of the build and construction is also going to be very high. So you've got to determine what kind of stock you're trying to create and where you're trying to create it in order to actually come up with those funds or come up with that budget that we're actually talking about. Now, the consistent thing between all of those, though, is the cost to run the deal. So there's going to be things like your town planning fees, your architecture fees, all those sorts of things. Those costs to actually run, you might need somewhere in the vicinity of anywhere between 100 and 150K of liquid cash to actually get your design and construction up and running. So that is paying your council application fees, your architect, your town planner, get your building approvals, all those sorts of things. So that is the cash that is genuinely needed no matter where you're going to get to. Then your deposit will vary based on where you're buying, and your serviceability will also based on where you're buying. Or alternatively, go into construction lending and look at the merits of the deal. Now, whilst that is the, I guess, the touch point that we talked about, we also teach that there are 7 low or no money down methods where you can actually control property rather than owning it, in which case those 3 elements, depending upon the methodology that you are able to I guess, use one of those 7 methods, you may be able to defer and or avoid some of those elements, okay? So, for example, if you do a joint venture with the landowner, now you don't need a deposit and you don't need serviceability. You are still going to need the liquid cash to actually run the deal. Okay. If you do an option contract with the landowner, then you're going to defer the deposit and you're going to defer the serviceability until a later point in the process where you may already have your development approval in place, and you may go directly to construction lending, and you may completely avoid the acquisition phase altogether by going straight to commercial construction lending. So there's a lot of different ways that problem can actually be solved. My encouragement is to start to learn the 7 low and no money down deals. Very soon, we will be releasing a course just on the 7 low and no money down methodologies and how to actually firstly identify them, unlock the opportunity, negotiate them, and a whole bunch more to give you some insights into what is actually possible. So that said, hope that helps you out, mate. Next question comes from Andre. So Andre says, there is a 5-unit DA-approved block with almost identical dimensions and site characteristics near a block which I'm investigating. Is there anything preventing me from contacting the architect and requesting a near copy-paste of the design? Similarly, what prevents other developers from copying designs of my developments? Andre, really good question here, mate. And there's a couple of elements to this. So firstly, your ability to actually identify the architect is relatively simple. You can actually look at the DA application drawings, and you can typically going to see the architect's details that are actually sitting on there. Now, depending upon the contractual arrangement that they had with that client, they may have a situation where the scope of work says that that is a unique custom design for that developer only, and they may have a contractual situation where they can't do the copy paste because they're on a promise to not do so. Okay, so that's probably the first element. The second element is, well, if that's not the case, could they copy and paste it? And the answer to that is probably and plausibly. However, every site is unique. Okay, so the contours of each site are going to be slightly different. The slope, I guess where the services are located, I guess where you may need entrance onto the property from a traffic perspective, because you may have other obstacles in your footpath. Maybe you've got a street tree in a different location, so you can't have the driveway in the same spot. So there's a whole bunch of things to consider, but conceptually, what you're actually talking about is plausible. And if you contact the architect that did that particular design, then they would be able to assess whether or not that is something for them to do. Now, in all instances, though, it is unlikely that they are going to discount their price points, given the fact that they still have to do the full analysis on the site and make sure that those things are actually compliant. But conceptually, you could understand the yield that is plausible on your particular site by using that outcome. Now, your question then went on to say, what is stopping other people from copying yours? The answer is nothing. I guess each architect will actually have the intellectual property rights on the design. And so another architect should not be copying that design, but they can be inspired by that design. Okay, so there's nothing stopping inspiration from one supplier to the next, but they can't do a direct copy. If you're wanting a direct copy, you're going to need to go to the original architect who actually did the design in the first place, and whether or not they are comfortable in actually doing that. The other thing that I would suggest to you is, even if you can get a direct copy, you want to start to ask yourself, should you do a direct copy? Because there are going to be elements that then start to standardize that, and maybe what is unique now in that one design, by the time you cookie cutter that and the next person cookie cutters that, now you've got the same design everywhere, and there's nothing that makes that particular product stand out. So the first question is, can it be done? Probably. The next question is, should it be done? Well, how far away are you from the other one? And is it going to impact the sale ability of your particular project? At very minimum, change the facade of your development, at very minimum. And I would say most likely you're probably needing to do some minor tweaks with the design, just to make sure that your project and the other project is not absolutely identical. Anyway, Andre, hope that helps you in that particular situation, mate. Next question comes from Wen. Wen says, I want to subdivide and build, then sell, but don't have enough money. So want to share the land and then sell and share the profit. Please advise if you know any developers willing to do via a proper legal contract. Then they go on to say, can you email me? The answer is no. When this process is to put them all on public so that everyone can actually benefit from the question. Now, where can you find these people? Well, you're going to find them at our property networking groups. So we run these all the way around the country. And if you want to, we run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And there's a masterminding process that we run at the end of every single one of these, where you can ask those exact questions, and the community will actually point you in the direction of people that are I guess doing those sorts of deals and looking for opportunities just like that. Now, I guess the challenge that I would say for you here is, you want to do it, but you don't have the money. But I don't know if you have no money and if you have no skills, or if you in which case, why would somebody want to joint venture with you? Or do you have something that you can actually bring to the table? So if you're looking to do a joint venture, you've got to understand what are your strengths and weaknesses and what is the next person's strengths and weaknesses. And you want to find a complementary outcome. If you can't find a complementary outcome, what's going to happen is you're going to start to collide. Both of you are going to want the same things, and you can have differences of opinion. So be very, very careful in trying to find a joint venture partner that they are complementary to you. Where you are strong, they are weak. Where you are weak, they are strong. And that way you're going to come up with a really good outcome. And you did touch on the most important part is via a proper legal contract. You should have your solicitor draw up a joint venture agreement. That joint venture agreement needs to understand all sorts of things, roles and responsibilities, intended exit strategies, what happens if there's a dispute and dispute resolution, how do you manage the project, who are the decision makers, all those sorts of things. If you map everything out, you want to map out everything in case it goes wrong, and then manage to the point where it does not go wrong. Okay, then you hopefully that contract will be parked in your drawer, never having to be pulled out. But if it does get drawn out because there is a dispute in some way, shape, or form, or something where it hasn't quite gone to plan, then at least you've thought through that. Now, for me in particular, my joint venture templates that I give to our students inside the Property Development Formula Program, they are a 40-page document that takes into consideration all of these elements. And even then, that is not customized for the individual project. Each one of those, then it's just really a starting template that they then give to their solicitor, and their solicitor then tweaks that for the individual circumstances of the project that they're actually going in. So there's lots that actually go into this concept. So be very, very cautious in doing that but come to our meetups, meet some people doing the same thing, doing development deals like you, and I'm sure that people can point you in the right direction. Now, next question comes from Andrew. Andrew has actually got a number of questions back to back here. So, and some of them are very, very technical. So given that I can't actually give legal and accounting advice, I need to be very cautious here. Okay. So first one, Andrew says, when raising funds with the AFSL, will an AFSL bypass the 2012-2 rule? Does this mean that the majority of property developers are doing a moderate level of development at, say, 1 to 2 medium-sized deals, would need an AFSL? Okay, then it goes on to say, noting you can make personal offers to individuals continually project after project. If so, does that mean you're likely to need to get a certified authorized representative? Okay, so this element here that I'm going to go into is very, very high level and should not be deemed to be advice at all, but rather educational in nature. And you are going to have to go speak to a lawyer, absolutely categorically. Raising funds from investors has a series of legislations that you need to consider. One of which, the first barrier is called the 2012-2 rule. So no more than 20 people in any 12 months raising a maximum of $2 million, okay? The intention of this is to be used as a one-off opportunity, as an exception to get your project across the line. The 20 people must be known to you. They cannot be strangers. They cannot be somebody that you just do a fire. You can't do a broadcast on social media and say, hey, who wants to get involved in my deal? Okay. The 20 people must be a personal invitation. So you need to send, have a conversation with Rob and say, hey, Rob, would you like to get involved? Now, whether Rob says yes or no or not, you have actually approached Rob, and that is now one person consumed out of your 20 people. Okay, so whether Rob invests or not is not the point. That is 20 people you approach. Okay, inside any 12 months. Okay, so you can't come and approach me again in inside that 12-month period. If you reach that 20, you can't approach number 21, okay? Raising no more than $2 million. The intention of this is to be a one-off exception. It's not meant to be the norm in how you raise money again and again and again. And I know a number of people out there that are doing exactly that. So it is extraordinarily dangerous. The next level of legislation that you might want to consider is to raise funds using what is called an AFSL, an Australian Financial Services License. And getting an AFSL is actually extraordinarily difficult. And you have to be certified, you have to go through a process, and you need to prove that you're a fit and proper person. And it can actually be quite a cumbersome process. Can be anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 to get the license in order to do that. And then you've got ongoing legislative compliance reasons that you need to maintain that license ongoing. So it can actually be quite problematic. For that reason, there is an in-between step called a CAR, a Certified Authorized Representative, where somebody with a license looks over your shoulder and makes sure that you are doing the right thing. They are effectively renting their license to you under their supervisory powers to make sure that you're actually doing the right thing. So you can, put together a product disclosure statement that talks about your particular project. The actual AFSL holder would review that. They would actually make sure that it is a compliant document. And then all of the investors would not approach you personally, but they would approach the AFSL license holder, and they would then anoint whether or not that person is a retail, sophisticated, or wholesale investor. Now, there's a whole bunch of legislation that sits around how do you qualify for that, and I'm not going to go into that here. So you will slowly start to graduate from projects to say, well, I'm going to do that with my own funds, maybe just with a joint venture partner deal number one. Then you might do the 2012-2 rule for deal number two. Then you might go to a certified authorized representative for deal number three, and then and maybe even deal number four. And then as you start to graduate and progress through your process, you may then go to get your own AFSL license yourself. Okay. So it is, an escalation process that you go through as you learn and as your deal sizes get bigger and bigger and bigger. There is also opportunities for, funds that are already set up to do exactly this. And you could approach the fund because they've already gone and done all the work for you. And so you've got to work out whether or not you want to be in the business of raising capital or whether or not you want to be in the business of property development, or are you actually going to be doing both? Okay. And if you're going to be doing both, then ASIC is going to deem that you are in the business of doing capital raising. So hence where the AFSL license is actually going to be required. So please, Andrew, go and speak to a solicitor. What I've touched on here is just a very high level overview of some of the things to actually take into consideration. A number of people do not take this anywhere near seriously enough, and they incorrectly try to use the 2012-2 rule many times, and they get themselves into a world of pain when they get the random audit and tapped on the shoulder, and all of a sudden their project is shut down and they wonder why. Okay. And so it's very hard to unravel that once you're actually deep into the process. Much better to plan ahead, to think about this, go get the appropriate legal advice, and do everything right from day one, and that will actually help you to get the outcome that you're looking for. Hoping that helps, Andrew. Now, as I said, Andrew's got a number of questions. So his next question is this. So he wants to know about the potential property sale price. How do you get an assessment of a potential development asset value, such as a townhouse, if the suburb that you're looking at developments for have no or very limited new townhouses built or sold? Despite this being despite there not being a history of townhouse developments being done, for many other reasons, his market research is telling him that infill developments with townhouses are needed and wanted in the area that is being prioritized for growth. Hence, it would make sense to focus on this suburb, but there is not a sales history for townhouse development, and it's unclear to prove the deal is profitable. So, Andrew, you've touched on the biggest point of this. If there is no evidence, you are being what is called the market maker. You are the one who is actually testing the market to see whether or not the demand that you think is there truly is there, okay, and the price point of that. Now, as a market maker, this is an extraordinarily risky approach. Okay. Now, if you are an experienced developer and you've done this for a long period of time and you actually understand how to read the market, then you can, and you've got some spare cash it's sitting in your kitty and you can afford to take the risk, then you may want to consider being the market maker. But for deal number one, deal number two, my strong encouragement is to not be the market maker, but rather identify this area as an area that has the potential, and then sit back and wait. Start farming other areas where you are seeing evidence. Sit back and wait and watch for someone else to be the market maker and determine whether or not that person is indeed profitable. It is at that point, if you see one or two people coming in and doing deals, then you can be an early adopter. So you're gonna piggyback on the fact that somebody else took the initial risk, and you're coming in and still taking a little bit of risk, but you're taking much, much, much less risk. Okay. Now, in an ideal world, I guess you want to see a minimum of 10 people having done similar sorts of projects as yourself in order to prove statistically that that you can actually do those deals and still make money. Because evidence of one deal is not a trend. One is not a trend. Okay, so if you want to get a good number of projects to actually go, okay, I can see that it was not just the fact that this is in the best street, or not just because this was in the best school catchment or anything like that, but I can actually see this entire area is actually starting to make sense. Now, that's my opinion on risk. Now, your specific question is, how do you assess it? Well, you're going to have to do what is called interpolating. So that is, you're interpreting data and assimilating that from many, many, many sources. So for example, you might go to the suburb to the north, the suburb to the south, suburb to the east, suburb to the west, and you'll look at the research on all of those projects, and you'll see, well, I can see what the price points are in the surrounding area. And so the balance of probability would suggest that the price in this area would be in this particular range. Now, if that range is within your risk profile and your risk tolerance, you may choose to be the market maker, but that is, again, a risky decision. But at least you've got, I guess, an order of magnitude of the likelihood of price points that may actually apply. But you've also got to consider what is unique about this particular suburb. That uniqueness may push the price point up, but it also might push the price point down. So you need to understand what it is about this particular project, this particular area, that's going to help you. My encouragement, mate, you've identified and your instincts are strong with regards to the fact that you see lots of potential here, but sit back and let somebody else be the market maker until you've got 4 or 5 projects under your belt, and you can actually see, I guess, have some money that you can afford to lose, and you can actually see and understand how to read the market a little bit better. That would be my encouragement, mate. Next question comes from Hung. Hung says, what are some of the ways to find out who the builder is on a recently built property? They've said specifically in Brisbane, but I'm just going to say recently built property, as I want to build something very similar nearby. DA application searches does not show who the builder is. No, you're right, Hung. The DA process won't, but the DA process will show who the architect is. In many instances, you'll be able to talk to the architect and they'll be able to give you insights into who the builder is, because the builder has probably worked with them during the construction process in order to get there. It'll also tell you who the developer is. And so you may be able to reach out to the developer and actually ask them whether or not they'd be willing to, I guess, recommend their builder in this particular instance. So they're probably the two easiest ways. There then is, I guess, the little more creative ways. Now, this is a little bit hit and miss as to whether or not we'll actually give you the results that you want. But Google Street View does a regular update of the Street View images. And so depending upon the area, it may update them every 6 months. It may update them every 12 months. It may update them every couple of years. But you can actually go back in Google Street View and look at the historical versions of the Google Street View images. So you might see today it's a brand new home, but if you go back 6 months or 12 months, you can actually see it's a construction site. Now, if you're able to zoom in, the fence line, whilst they were actually under construction, will always have a sign with the builder's details and the builder's license number, and quite often the builder's phone number. So I've used that many, many times in order to find who the builder is. Now, it's not reliable, it's not consistent. You're not always going to be guaranteed of actually getting that result, but it is still worth the effort of actually trying to see whether or not you can actually get the outcomes. So hoping that helps, Hung. Andrew again has another question. Can you provide a template example of JV partner splits on equity and sweat equity contributions? This is just to get a feel of what industry would see reasonable and fair as a split. Andrew, this is a really interesting one because it really comes down to what is the contribution of each of the parties when it comes to the deal itself, okay? Now, when you're coming into the process and you're trying to do your very first project, and it's a nice small project, it might be a 1 to 2 subdivision, or it might be, I guess, a spec build, or it might be, say, a duplex or something along those lines, then typically you might have one person who's the sweat equity partner and one person who is the money partner. Now, the money partner, we touched on this earlier, has 3 lots of cash that they're actually trying to provide. There's the deposit, there's the serviceability, and there's the liquid cash to run the deal. And there's also those 3 phases that we're thinking about: acquisition, construction, and any residual stock we might be keeping. So depending upon how much money they're contributing in each of those 3 areas for each of those 3 stages would greatly impact what that profit split is. Now, if the money partner can provide all the money on that relatively simple deal, you would typically see deals where it's a 50-50 profit split, okay? But if they're not able to provide all 3 elements, let's just say that they've got the deposit and the serviceability, but they don't have the liquid cash to provide the deal, then you might not give them the entire 50%, okay? So you might say give them 40% as an example of the profit split because you're coming up with the liquid cash to run the deal. Now, that said, whilst that can be negotiated, it's not always the case that it is negotiated in that particular way, because if you can't do the deal without this particular person, you may reluctantly have to give up a little bit more of your profits in order to get the deal done. So you've got to start to think about, well, what is typical versus what do you specifically need for your individual circumstances. Now, as the deal sizes start to get bigger, okay, considering the same style of project, so if you're doing a duplex and then you go on to do a 4-pack of townhouses and then a 6-pack of townhouses and then 10-pack, and as you go up, the effort and required for the sweat equity partner at some point starts to then stagnate. So the difference between doing the effort on a 6-pack and the difference of doing it in a 10-pack is about the same level of effort, okay? But from a financial perspective, the financial money partner, their risk, they've put more money into the deal. Their risk is, I guess, proportionally a little bit higher. So as the deal starts to get bigger, you might find that the profit split starts to shift in favor of the money partner. So it might go from a 50-50 to a 60-40 to eventually a 70-30. But it's 30% of a much bigger profit in this particular instance because it's a much bigger deal. So you want to start to think about that from a 50-50 perspective as your starting point, and then it's slowly going to ratchet over time as your deal sizes start to increase. Anyway, hope that helps, Andrew. Next one comes from Christopher. Christopher says, what expert should I talk to help with analyzing a build contract from a custom builder? Now, Christopher, this is a super, super, super important question, and I'm glad that you've actually asked it. You'll get a very generic answer from people that will say you need to talk to your lawyer, but there needs to be a very specific kind of lawyer. It needs to be a construction lawyer, okay? Now, the construction lawyer is somebody who specializes in building and construction contract law, because there are multiple different kinds of building and construction contracts that are actually sitting out there. There's the HIA, there's the master builders, there's the Australian standards, there's the architects contract as well. So there's a number of different contracts, and each one of them has their own idiosyncrasies with regards to how biased it is towards one party or the other. So, for example, the master builders and the HIA contracts are biased with regards to the builder. The Australian standards are more equally balanced, and the architect's contract is probably more, in favor of the developer. So there's a couple of different elements that you want to start to consider there. Lots of things where there are gotchas in each and every one of those contracts. And so you need someone who specializes in construction law to actually understand what are the things that you want to be doing and thinking about in going into that. Now, they might recommend a specific kind of contract, and your builder might not be comfortable with that kind of contract. because they don't have that level of experience, or alternatively, they want to keep the contract in their favor and stick with a master builder type contract. Now, when you're doing smaller scale projects, you're more likely to see a master builder or HIA contract. So if you're doing a 6-pack or below, you're more likely to see that sort of contract. As you're starting to increase in deal size, you're then starting to move to more towards the more commercially minded, I guess, architect's contract or the Australian standards contract. And there's a couple of different versions of the Australian standards contract as well. So very, 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 very much recommend that you actually talk to a construction lawyer to understand the differences between them and when you might want to switch between one and the other. Next question comes from Sequinda. Sequinda says, I'm in the middle of a 1 into 4 lot subdivision in Logan Council and have a question about planned ceiling costs. I engaged a surveyor company who initially quoted $1,650 paid in advance for the planned ceiling process, but they've now come back asking for an additional $3,500. Is this a standard increase or should I be concerned? What I would appreciate any insights and experience into this. Trying to understand if this is reasonable or something I need to push back on. Secunda, what I would suggest, mate, is you probably need to start to think about at what point in the process did they give you the quote? Did they give you that quote before the development application was even lodged and they didn't know what the DA approval conditions were, in which case they weren't aware of some of the things that they need to go and sanity check? Or did they give you the quote at the point where you had the full DA, they could actually review the entire scope and they knew exactly what was going on? So if it's very, very early in the process, then they may have legitimate reasons why the additional costs have actually been incurred, because there might be some contract conditions that are a little bit more onerous that they need to go and validate, okay? If, however, they had the full development application at the point where they actually did that, now you probably want to be asking the more hard questions like you're trying to ask us in this particular instance, to say, why the variation? How do we actually justify what that's actually for? Now, that said, it is not an unreasonable price point that they've quoted, subject to what is the scope of works, okay? And that's the question that you've got to look at. What is the scope of works that you are actually looking at? When you look at the original quote and look at what was in or out of the scope of works, and now as you look at the current amended quote and what is in and out, see what the differences are, what extra level of services they're actually trying to provide. That is really where the true question actually comes in. I would then go and have a more qualified question with them when you actually understand the differences in scope, and then actually ask them why the variation at that point. Now, it is a relatively large jump proportional to the price points, but it's also within the range of what might be deemed to be reasonable. And so it's not that it is a inappropriate price. It's whether or not for your specific circumstances, it has understood all of the issues and challenges it's actually trying to resolve. Anyway, hope that helps, Sequinda. Next one comes from Mansur. Mansur says, I came across a planning permit, a 1 into 3, which was just for development with no subdivisions. Just for development with no subdivision. What are the benefits of this approach? I always thought subdivide first, then develop, or at least do it in parallel. Man, so this is a little bit tricky, because I don't know if you're trying to do a land subdivision or if you're trying to do townhouses in this particular instance. But it sounds like a townhouse development project, okay? Now, I'm going to go back a couple of steps, because the subdivision element actually happens in both, okay? But it's a different kind of subdivision. And so important to actually understand that what you're trying to do and the sequence that things are done are very, very different. If you're trying to do a land subdivision, then that is what they call a standard format plan subdivision. And you are effectively subdividing the land two-dimensionally on what is relatively a flat surface, okay? So you subdivide the land first and then you build. That is if you're doing a land subdivision. And when you build, you're going to be respecting front setbacks, side setbacks, rear setbacks, etc. Okay. If you're doing a multi-res, whether it be townhouse or whether it be apartments, then you do the order slightly differently. So if you're doing, so you would do the construction element first, in which case you don't have to respect the, I guess, the setbacks between buildings. They can actually be what they call attached. And so in doing so, you would then do what is called a building format plan, in which case you're doing a 3-dimensional subdivision because you're subdividing down the shared boundary wall of a townhouse. Or if you're doing apartments, then you're going to be doing a strata subdivision, which is strata meaning air, which means you're subdividing 3-dimensionally in space. That is, you might have your ceiling is the floor of the one above, and your wall is the wall of the one next door. So you might have a, I guess, a unit that is hovering in midair with regards to, I guess, the exclusive use area, and you may also have some common area boundaries. So depending upon what the kind of project is, will change the order that it is done, and also the kind of subdivision that you're actually trying to do. So that said, your question, if I go back to the question, it was just for the development itself with no subdivision. So what they're saying is that well, what I'm inferring that you're saying is they're going to do the construction of the townhouses in this instance, or the apartments, and they're not going to do the building format plan subdivision at the end. So the intention here would be that they're wanting to keep all of it on one title. Now that has multiple benefits. 1, less land tax. 2, less rates. 3, there would be no body corporate or strata management fees because you are the owner. But in order to do so, you need to retain everything. Now that used to be very, very, very common way back in the day, and you'll still find some units and townhouse projects where they were done on one title, and you can now, I guess, retrospectively do those subdivisions and sell them off as individual dwellings, but that is less common nowadays because the cost of retaining projects is a lot higher, but still can be done. Next question comes from Anastasia. Anastasia says, in Redland councils, when the block is sloping away from the street, is it possible to propose house builds as part of the DA for roof water discharge? I'm getting contradictory feedback. So Anastasia, this is what is called a charged line, okay? So a charged line, because you're sloping away from the road, you're needing to get stormwater up to the road. You're effectively pushing stormwater uphill. What you're trying to suggest, and if I'm trying to do this, so you've got the land going down here, and this is the street sitting up here. If you put a house on top, the roof is higher than the street. So the roof water pressure would actually push the water down through the downpipe and then uphill and then push it out into the street. The problem is this particular section here where it goes uphill. Okay, that once the rain has actually finished, that water will actually collect in that pipe, and that could mean tree frogs will sit in there, could mean leaves will get stuck in there, a whole bunch of things like that. So there are some councils that do not like charge line systems, and other councils which are accepting of it, but only if you complete the construction of the house in the first place. And the reason for that is council only get one chance to control whether or not the DA has been built appropriately. So if you sell that vacant land with a I guess a condition that says you must do a charge line later on, when somebody does the house construct, that is just a building approval, not a development approval. So council can't mandate what's actually happening in that instance. They don't have complete visibility. So they may demand that you must build if you're going to use a charge line system. Now, whether or not Redland Council will allow for a charge line system, I'm not sure. But if you go back and ask using that specific terminology, you might get a slightly different answer because they may not be understanding what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. So a charged line is what it is that you need. My suggestion would be go and talk to your civil engineer who specializes in the Redland Council, who's come up with many of these designs, and see whether or not that is something that they've had experience in the Redland Council themselves. Okay. Closing in the last couple of questions, folks. So next one from Camden says, How can I determine whether or not a property can be subdivided in Moreton Bay, Queensland? Well, Camden, I'm actually going to broaden this question out to be a little bit broader so that everybody understands the process in every council, because the concept is relatively similar, okay? So firstly, there will be a zoning. So the zoning is the maximum potential of a site. Then there's going to be a whole bunch of overlays that sit over the top of that. So you could have a flood overlay, a bushfire overlay, I guess all sorts of other overlays that might sit on there. There could be a environmental overlay, all sorts of things like that. That will determine whether or not the maximum potential is actually able to be achieved. Now, from the zoning potential, you can then look up the council's rules and say, what is the minimum lot size and what is the frontage for that zoning? And what are the conditions under which that they would actually approve that? Now, for some councils, they require minimum frontage levels in order to do that. And if you're trying to do what is called a battle axe subdivision, then you may find that there are conditions with regards to how wide the driveway needs to be, and the fact that the rear lot, in some instances, may need to be larger than the front lot. So you need to understand those rules with regards to the minimum lot sizes that actually apply. And then when you know that, then you can start to say, well, based on the zoning, the land size, the frontage, and is it a front or rear property, that gives me the theoretical potential. And then I'm going to look at all of my overlays to then determine whether or not that theoretical potential is going to be actually realized, because there might be a restrictive overlay that stops that from actually occurring. So that's how you actually do that. Now, when you ask your specific questions with regard to Moreton Bay Council, then you're going to look up the Moreton Bay planning code and actually look those up. Quite often they will have a subdivision guide that might give you the insights into that. Sometimes it's a 2 or 3 pager. Sometimes it's a 20 or 30 pager that's going to give you all the different permutations of how a design can actually be done. But most councils are pretty helpful in actually giving you those guides to actually help you to make that determination yourself. In either instance, go talk to a town planner and they'll be able to give you with certainty what you're actually trying to achieve. But my suggestion is you do the homework first, validate what you believe to be a solid outcome. And then once you know what that is, then you can have a more qualified question with your town planner and you'll get a better outcome. Next question comes from Sophian. Sophian says, when building a duplex, detached or attached in New South Wales via the CDC process, that is Complying Development Code, that's the fast track process in New South Wales, does the builder typically include civil works in the duplex construction, or as a developer, do I have to do it first? Sophian, that is a very good question, but to be honest, it could be either or both. It really comes down to what is the scope of works that you want the builder to actually achieve. So if you want to have a more hands-off approach, then you can put within the scope of works that the builder will actually do all of those works themselves, and they will then coordinate that on your behalf. Now, they will put a little bit of a management fee over the top of that, being their builder's margin. But that means that you can, I guess, sit back and the builder is taking on all of that risk and all of that effort, okay? Or alternatively, if you want to save a few dollars yourself, you can actually also do that by going and engaging with your civil engineer yourself. They will then take that out to, I guess, do a detailed design, take that out to tender and construct. And then you could hand that over to the builder, I guess, knowing that it's just something that they actually plug into. So it could be an either or both. For your very first project, you may consider that you actually get the builder to do it and you learn from that process. The second project, you might say, well, I'm going to take that on myself. And because I saw what was involved the first time around, and I believe that I actually can do that. So hoping that helps. Lucky last question from Leanne. In Victoria, my question is regarding setting up a body corporate for a 3-lot subdivision. It has common property. Who sets up and what costs are involved? Not planning to get it managed at the moment. Can it be done easily without a management company? So Leanne, this is a little bit of a loaded question because you've not been very clear in exactly is this townhouses or is it a land subdivision? So the answer is very, very slightly different. what I find in Victoria is there's not a lot of land subdivisions that are actually done on a smaller scale like this. Typically, there are more townhouse developments that they then do strata subdivisions at the end, okay, or a building format plan subdivision. Now, if that's the case, okay, typically you're going to have a strata management company or a building or a different terminology in different states. So a strata manager or I guess a body corporate, depending upon the state that you're in, that would actually manage that. Now, if you are going to do that, you have two choices. You can get your solicitor to draw up the body corporate or the strata rules, in which case that is at your expense, and then you can then hand that over to a body corporate organization to then manage. Or alternatively, you can actually go directly to the body corporate company, and they will often do that for free in the condition that they get to manage the body corporate for the first couple of years, okay? Because they know that once they're in place, it's very difficult to dislodge them. So they will often absorb that cost into their process right up front. Now, what you've said is that you're not planning to get it managed at the moment, which tends to infer that you're wanting to, I guess, keep all three properties at this point in time, in which case, why go to the effort of subdividing at this point in time if you're going to keep all three of them? Because if you do actually set it up and separate them onto their own individual titles, then you'll get more land tax and more rates. So you want to be thinking about, well, if you're going to sell one, then you must get it set up. If you're going to keep all of them, then you could defer that to a later point in time. Or maybe not even at all, depending upon when you're wanting to do that, which refers to the question we had a little bit earlier on in the process. Anyway, folks, I hope that helps. I hope you got plenty out of that process. If you want to submit your questions for next month, we run these typically on the first Sunday of every single month. Go to propdev.info/open-mic and I guess we will do whatever we can to prepare those questions for next month. Now, in the meantime, we run events all the way around the country. So we run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. They are physical. You can physically turn up to each one of them. They are also live streamed, which means you can turn up to them anywhere around the country. Our intention is to do this in Perth in the not too distant future. So if you are in Perth, make sure you reach out to us and let us know to head your way, because we need some momentum to actually make the effort actually worthwhile. But we would actually love to see you all there. That said, folks, hoping that you got plenty from that. Looking forward to seeing you at our next Sunday session or one of our upcoming meetups. Till then, folks, bye for now. Bye.